Hi guys! So this is a video recording and this is what we're going to be painting today. I hope you are as excited as I am. So before we start, just keep in mind, because this is a video recording, you're welcome to pause it at any point, give yourself enough time, and then whenever you're ready, you can just resume the video and move to the next step. I'm going to be going at my own pace, so you keep your own pace in mind and, of course, pause it as needed. Before we start, let's go through all our supplies to make sure we have everything that we need for today. First thing you're going to need is a canvas. I'm going to be using fairly small canvas. This is 8 by 10 inch, so this is what I originally made this painting on. So that's why I'm going to stick with the same canvas. You're welcome to use absolutely any size. The only difference is if you go with a little bit of a bigger canvas, you may want to use slightly bigger brushes than what I'm using today. And if you go with a smaller canvas, you may want to use smaller brushes. That's the only difference. Then we're going to need a paint. I'm going to be using primary colors only, which is yellow, red, blue, black, and white. For this painting, it doesn't really matter what red you use. It doesn't matter what yellow you use. It doesn't matter what white or black, but it does matter what blue. Because blue we're using to create this beautiful, bright teal color. And not all blues will give you that color. The blue that I would suggest you use for this painting is either Phthalo blue or primary blue. So I would highly discourage you from using ultramarine blue. So just don't use ultramarine blue or any blue that has a purple undertone. Only use blues that have more of a greenish undertone to them. So Phthalo blue or primary blue will work perfect. Now if you guys have pre-mixed colors, you're welcome to use them too. If you have pre-mixed shade of teal or maybe a couple different shades of teal or aqua, you're absolutely welcome to use them, in which case you're not really going to need blue. And if you have green, because we do have a bit of green here, and just a little bit on the background. If you have a green premix as well, great. You don't need blue. And for our flower, you can use a red and a couple different shades of orange. So if you have all those premixed, you're welcome to use them. If not, we'll mix them together and I'll show you how to do that. And what else are we going to need? We're going to need a pencil because we're going to start with a sketch. So make sure you have a pencil, and preferably you should have an eraser as well, because, you know, sketches don't always turn out right from the first try. And also we're going to need brushes. I'm going to be using 3 different brushes today. This is about a medium-large brush. I'm only going to use this one for my background. This is number 12 for anyone who's wondering. But don't go by numbers, just go by something bigger for your background. Then this is a medium-small brush. I'm going to use it mostly for my flower and all those colorful spots. This is number 6 for those who are wondering, but again, it doesn't have to be that particular number. And of course, you're going to need a good, detailed, pointy, small brush. So this brush is number 0. Number 0 is always the most ideal brush. However, if you don't have a pointy number 0, number 1 and number 2 will also work, as long as they have a really nice pointy tip for you to get all the details in. And of course, standard set, paper towel or usable fabric cloth, and some water. That's pretty much all that we're going to need for today. Now, I'm going to put my brushes aside, and I'm going to put my paint aside, and we're going to start with a sketch. You guys can refer to this image on your screen, and from time to time I'm going to be showing you this one as well. So the first thing we're going to need is to figure out where is the bottom of our flower. So where is this? Where does our flower begin? I'm actually going to start by putting this line. You see this bowl-like line. So as if you're painting a bowl of something. So I would say this is a little bit higher than the middle. So if this is the middle of our canvas, I would say just a touch higher than the middle. That's where we're going to position this line. So this is the middle, just a touch higher, and just let's make a line. We can adjust it if we don't like it, if we think it's too big or too small. Everything is adjustable. All right, that's a good start, I would say. Now, we're going to start breaking it up onto flower petals. So from in the middle here, so do you see? Right now we have this line, right? That's all we have. Actually, I might make it a little bit longer. Yeah, that's pretty good. So now, let's add this flower petal right here. So do you see it's about in the middle of this. There's still a bit of chunks to go on the side. So I would say it should be about this size. You see, so there's still a bit more space to go on the sides. It's like we're adding another bowl-like curved line. And then from there, we're adding randomly shaped top. So you don't want it to be a more of a wavy line. You want it to be a very wiggly, weirdly shaped line. However you shape it, that's what it's going to be. There's no particular shape that you have to have for it. Yeah, looks pretty good. So that's my one flower petal. Now I'm going to add a couple more flower petals. Do you see? There is one big flower petal here that kind of wraps around and folds this way. So this is another edge of the same flower petal that's folded. And there is unfolded large flower petal here. And there's a bit of distance in between. So that's what we're going to do. Starting from this edge, I'm going to add this flower petal. It's not going to go right towards, so if this is the middle of our small flower petal, right? It's not going to go right to the middle. It's going to stop a little bit before that. So there is a gap between two of our flower petals. So I'm going to indicate this gap first. And then from here up, I'm going to add a line. Here's a flower petal for us. And then I'm going to add that wrapped edge. So you see now there's an edge that's being wrapped around. And I'll do something similar on this side. So again, we already know where it ends, so we can bring this higher up. And just add this flower petal as well. Great, we have our flower petals, and then there is one more right in between. You see right here. It's a little bit higher up, so we're just going to fill that space with that slightly higher up flower petal. That's great. All right, we have the top. Now we're going to need to do this bottom part. So I'm going to start with this section that is a little bit sticking out. So starting from somewhere here, from I would say the middle, because this is about the middle, right, of everything. I'm going to put a line going up, slightly curved, just to indicate the direction of it. And then once I figure out how far I want it to go, I'm going to bring a curved line right here. And this one is quite wavy, as you noticed. This is shaping my flower petal. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer to this main part here. And I'm going to wrap it pretty much until here. You see, not the very top, a little bit lower. And that's pretty much our bottom. So the only thing that's missing is really the underneath part. Actually, I might even make this one a little more sticking out here. Make it more like this. Yeah, I like that. So the only thing that I'm missing now is you see this underneath part. So I'm going to add the underneath part, just a little bit of that. I think that's great for me personally. You guys take a really good look at your flower and adjust whatever you may not like. So for example, if you feel like it's just out of balance, something is too big or something is too small, adjust it. It's best to do this on this step while we're still on a sketch, because again, we're doing it with a pencil and eraser, so you can adjust, you can erase anything that you don't like, that doesn't feel right to you, and redo it. Yeah, and then whenever you're ready, then we're going to move on to our stem, we're going to end our stem, and then we'll start painting. So for me, I'm quite happy with this. I kind of like how it is, so I don't think I want to adjust much here, but if you have something you want to adjust, please do that. And then whenever you have it, we're going to add a stem. The stem is going to be, it's coming from the middle, and it's slightly curved, so it's not a straight line. It has this a little bit of a curve this way. And this little guy, you can sketch him or you don't have to. I'm going to sketch him, but again, we can always add them on top in the end later too, because he's super, super simple. So I'm going to start with like an upside down teardrop looking thing. And then I'm going to add a stem. And that's pretty much it for it, for the sketch of it. Alright guys, and that is it. We have our sketch. So again, if you need to take a bit more time for this, it's a good time to pause our video and just take that time to perfect your sketch. But whenever you're ready, we're going to move to our painting, and we're going to move to our background. That's the first thing we're going to do here. So I'm going to take my paint and I'm going to make my teal. I'm going to be using my biggest brush that I have here. It's not very big, as I mentioned earlier, but it's the biggest one out of what I have. And what I'm going to start with, I'm going to start by making light blue. So I'm going to scoop some blue on the side, well, maybe even medium blue. Some white, make my medium blue, and then to this color I'm going to start adding yellow little by little. So don't add equal parts. You see I'm taking like a little smidge, adding it in, then I'm going to take another little smidge, add it in, and then another little smidge, add it in, and so on until I arrive at the right color. If you add too much, it's going to turn green really, really fast, and that's not what we want. So for me, this is actually a perfect color. But if you would like, again, adjust it as needed, because it's your painting, it's your preference. And then this is not the color I'm going to use actually. I'm going to take a bit of that and mix it with some white and a little bit of water. I want it slightly more watered down. And to this one, I actually might even add a bit more yellow. Oh yeah, beautiful color. So I'm going to start with this one. And I'm going to pretty much color in the entire background with it. You see it's light teal color, maybe even mint color. It's something between teal and mint. And you can slightly get it on your flower and a stem. You don't have to really avoid them. I mean, if you can and if you prefer that, that's fine. But if you get a little bit of paint on them, not a big deal. The only thing I would say, make sure you actually don't have any empty spaces between your background and an outline, because that's going to be, so what I don't want you to do is color like this. Do you see leaving some gaps in between? Don't leave any gaps, and ideally do all the background in vertical brush strokes. Or color it however you can first and then go over it in the vertical brushstrokes so they have this texture of a vertical brushstrokes. And the background you want to do quite fast, so I wouldn't take any breaks here. Actually need to mix a little bit more of this color because I ran out, and that's okay. You can mix that, it's not a big deal. And if it doesn't turn out the exact same shade, so be it. And that's not a bad thing. Our background ideally would have lots of different shades that we're going to add there, so again, if it's not the same shade, great, even better. If you have premixed dark teal or aqua, you can just add a bit of white to them and use that color. So do you see I have a background, but now before it dries, I kind of want to start adding other colors. So now I'm going to grab a little bit of my darker teal that we mixed originally, this darker teal or aqua, and I'm going to brush it in a little bit from closer to the outside and from the edge. So for example, I'm going to start top left. And you see I'm flicking from the edge in. Then I'm going to take a bit more and I'm going to flick it from the bottom. Again, from the edge in. And you can do a bit more around the sides actually. I'm going to take a bit more, I'm going to flick it here. So always from the edge in, and you almost dry brushing it. You don't want to use too much paint on your brush, because if you use a lot of paint, it's going to turn into like a linear blob, and that's not what we want. We want this wispy, light, almost transparent thing. That's what we want. So use just enough paint. And you will know what enough is once you start doing it. So if you start doing it and you feel like, oh no, that's too harsh, let's say you add a linear blob that's a warm bound that just looks like a line. What you could do to fix it is you could wash off your brush, dab it off on a paper towel, and with a clean wet brush, just slightly go over it and smudge it into the background. So I did that color. Now I'm going to take straight white, wash off my brush, dab it off on a paper towel, take some straight white, and now with straight white, I'm going to add it closer to the middle. So again, just a little bit of white on your brush, and you're going to dry brush it over your still wet teal color so it blends. Because if your teal color dries by now, you're not going to really be able to do this because it's just going to look too white. It's not going to look properly blended, because you see right now as we add it in, I'm going to get rid of some of it here so I can see my outline a little better. As we add it in, you see it blends into lighter shades of teal, which is exactly what we want. We want that. We're adding it not so, we don't want it to look just white. We don't want to end up with a spot of white. We want to end up with a spot of lighter shades. So that's why we're adding it. So if it's not doing it for you, it's looking too white, then what you should do, instead of using just straight white, use light teal. So instead of what I'm using now, mix it with your teal to make a lighter version and then use that instead. Yeah, this looks really good to me. And then I want to add a bit of green. So to the same color that I just used, you see this darker teal? I'm going to add a bit more blue to make it just a touch more darker, and more yellow this time, quite a bit more yellow. So it has a visible tint of green. And again, using just a bit of this paint, not a lot. Sometimes I would even dab it off on a paper towel first to make sure I don't have too much paint on my brush. And with this, I'm going to add it just in a couple spots. Add it a little bit right here. Again, brushing it in from the outside in, so from the edge in. I'll add it there. I'll even add it here. Where else should I add it? Definitely right here. Maybe a touch right here. Maybe a touch here too. Again, you see dry brushing. So basically, dry brushing technique is when you use just a tiny touch of paint on your brush. You don't use too much, but also you don't push on your brush. You just scrape the surface of your canvas. All right. See, lightly, just scraping the surface of the canvas, pretty much like this. It goes on like dust or like powder. That's what it should look like. You see, very powdery. And it's all about how much paint you use and how you apply it on your canvas with your brush. So very, very lightly. And this is pretty much all that we need, but if you would like to have a couple more shades, you can add a couple more shades. I think I want to add a few more shades of like a greener color. So I'm going to take a smidge of that because this is quite green, right? I'll mix it with some white. This is super optional, guys. You don't have to do that. This is plenty of shades already. But if you wanted something extra, so I'm going to make a slightly greener color here. I'll maybe add a couple brush strokes of that too, maybe even greener than that. And to make it greener, you always just add a smidge more yellow. That's all it is. Oh yeah, I like that. You see, it's just like a little smidge of green. Again, very powdery brush strokes. Do you see how light it overlaps? That's what you want. That's the dry brushing technique that you want to do here. Whether on wet or on dry, doesn't matter. I'm hardly touching the surface of my canvas. I'm literally scraping this paint on. It's very similar to how you would apply, maybe if you were applying blush in a makeup or any kind of highlighter. You don't want to apply it heavy, right? You don't want to end up with the red cheeks, with like red circles in your cheeks. You'd be applying it very lightly. So it only has a smidge of that shade. So that's pretty much the same, but for the painting on a canvas. You need to have that lightness of application. Maybe I'll add a bit more white. So now I'm just going to dry brush it on. So I'm going to take a tiny touch of white. You see, rub it in my brush. Because this is already quite dry, so it's not going to be mixing into my teals. So I'm going to dry brush it very, very lightly because this is going to be going on more like a straight white. As you can see here, it doesn't blend too much. But that's okay because I'm going to dry brush it on extremely lightly. Here. Again, I'll take just a minuscule amount of paint, dab it, rub it into my brush, and then very, very lightly scrape it onto my canvas. And I'm going to do it from the flower out. You see, lightening up the section around my flower. Honestly, guys, I'm super happy with this amount of paint and with this what it looks like, so I think I'm gonna stop. Now, if you wanted to do your edges, you can do them now or we can do them after we are fully done. I usually do edges if I'm not going to take a break, if I'm going to paint right through, so basically move to the next step right away, I'll do my edges later because I'm holding my canvas a lot of the time. But if you don't mind taking a break while we're still on the teal colors, what you could do is you can just color match. You probably still have quite a few colors on your palette, everything that we used here. So if there was a darker color, take that darker color and apply it to the edge. If there was a lighter color, apply lighter color, and so on. So basically just color match what's going on here, whatever comes to the edge, bring it around the edge. And then just put it aside and let it dry for a couple minutes. Because again, that way you don't have to mix those colors later on again. Or you can just take one color, I would say the darkest probably out of what you used, and just color your edges with that if you don't want to bother with color matching. But again, I wouldn't be doing it personally because I'm holding my canvas. If you're not holding your canvas or if you have a desire and ability to pause it for a good probably 5-10 minutes to let it dry, please do that. That way you don't have to mix them again, or you can mix them again later and we'll deal with that when it comes. So now I'm done with my background. I'm going to wash off my brush. I'll dab it off on my paper towel and I'll put it aside because I'm not going to be using this brush anymore. I am done with it, so I want to make sure it's nice and clean. And then after that, I'm going to move to my medium small brush. And with this brush, I'm going to move on to my flower and I'm going to start coloring in my flower. So even here, I'm not going to use just one color. I'm going to start coloring in using a couple different colors. So for my first layer, I'm just going to use like a lighter orange color, like a lighter coral color, and I'm going to use straight red. So let's make both of them right away. I'm going to start with my lighter one. Actually, let's start with darker one. So in my case, my straight red, it has a bit more of a magenta undertone. You see, it has like a pinker undertone, which is great. I love that color, but it's not what I'm looking for in this painting. In this painting, I'm looking more for a coral or orange undertone red. So even for my darker color, I'm going to need to add in just a little bit of yellow to give it that orangey hint to it. I'm not trying to create orange. As you can see, it's still super, super red. It's just instead of pink undertone, it has more of a coral or warmer. Do you see the difference? It is clearly visible difference, so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking at fire truck versus the raspberry color. And then I'll take a little bit of that color and I'll add some white to it. And maybe actually even more yellow to create my lighter version. This coral-like color. So do you see it's a little more orangey, it's a little lighter, but it's not a straight on orange. It's still that beautiful mixture. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to color all my flower petals. Top is going to have this color, so I'm just going to go right on top of a flower petal with this lighter color. And ideally, you want to have your background dry for this, or somewhat dry. If it's not fully dry, it's not a big deal, but it should be somewhat dry because you don't want to work on a completely wet background because it's going to be blending too much into your color. That's just not what we're looking for. I'm going to start with this too. You see it at the top. Then right away, I'm going to wash my brush before it dries, dab it off on a paper towel, and I'm going to grab my darker color. And with this darker color, I'm going to color in. So I'm going to color my bottom first of the same flower petals. And then I'm going to blend them to create a transitional color. So I'm blending with next to no paint on my brush. So basically with almost a clean brush, so that my brush picks up a bit of wet color from the bottom, so it picks up a bit of wet color from the top, and creates something in between. So then when I'm ready to go to my next one, I'm going to refill my brush again with this darker color, and again I'm going to start on the bottom where my brush is still full of paint. That's it here. And then I will even dab it off on a paper towel, and then with a brush with next to no paint left, I'm going to start smudging the two colors, this section between the two colors. So it picks up a bit of color from the top, a bit of color from the bottom. All right, that's great. Now I'm going to move to this one. So again, I wash off my brush. I start with my lighter color. And with the top. And then I'll wash my brush, grab my darker color. Actually, don't even wash your brush, you can just dab it off. Grab my darker color and create that blending again. So we'll color all the bottom with dark first. And I'm going to dab off my brush on the paper towel. And with a brush with next to no paint on it, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to smudge it, smudge it, smudge it, smudge it. Beautiful. So do you see we got a beautiful ombre going between here, nice gradient, right? Now let's do this last one at the back. So again, the same thing. We'll start with a lighter color. You might want to switch a brush to a smaller one at this point if you find that the medium small is just not working for you because it's such a small element, or you can continue with a small, medium small brush. I would say whatever works really. And then red. I'll bring the red a little bit higher up here. All right, and then the rest. So for the rest, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to color it flat with just lighter color, and then I'm going to flick darker one from the inside out. And again, use whichever brush is appropriate. For me, I'm still quite okay with the same brush, but if you find that it's a little too hard for you to work with because it's a little too big at this point, that's okay, switch to something smaller. Alright, so I have that tone. Now I'm going to either using the same brush or take a smaller one, take a dark red. Again, dab off your brush on a paper towel first, or wash it off, whatever works. And then on wet, while everything is still wet, we'll just flick it a little bit from the inside out. So it creates a nice blending. But again, dry brushing. So you don't use too much paint in your brush, you just use a little bit. All right, beautiful. And that's just first layer, right? But while we still have these colors, why don't we add them to our background? And you can use here large brush, well, the largest that we used for background already, or you can use this medium small or medium large, whichever you prefer. I'm probably going to use both. I'm going to start with my darker color, and I'm going to take it on my medium large brush, but just a little bit. And I'm going to blend it in right here. You see, still dry brushing it on, so we're not using a ton of paint on our brush, we're using enough. And I'm going to add a little bit right here, very lightly. So again, if you start doing this and you find that it gives you like a big blob, then just make sure you use less paint next time, or you apply a lighter. Or if it's the other way around, you start applying it and you feel like, oh, it's not doing anything, it just looks like a dirty spot, that means you don't have enough paint. So just grab a bit more. Add a smidge right here, here. Then, after I added some, I'm actually to my darkest red here, I'm going to add a little bit of white, just to make it a touch lighter. Because you see, as we were adding it on a teal, it actually looks darker than what it looks when we add it on white, right? And it makes sense because we added it on a darker background. But now, by adding white, it should start looking a bit more vibrant. You see, because white, what it does when you add it to a paint, it makes it less transparent. So you can hardly see what's underneath the paint. So now we're going to add a couple dry brushy brush strokes right here. The same color with just a bit more white in it, and you see it looks completely different. It has this vibrancy that the previous color didn't have. So I'll add a little bit here, a little bit here. A touch here as well. And of course the bottom part. This much here. Alright, and now I'm going to wash off my medium large brush. And by the way, for those of you guys who have your sides, your edges done, feel free to bring all these colors, every color that you're adding, onto your edge. So now I'm going to wash off this brush, put it aside, and I'm going to grab this brush. And a little bit more of the same color that I'm just using now here. But now I'm going to add them more linear. So still dry brushing, not too much paint, but a bit more linear and a bit more brush stroke. So do you see? It's not going to be just fluffy spots, really. You're going to see the lines. You can add them technically anywhere that you want. Right, and now using the same brush, I'm going to wash it off, dab it off on a paper towel, and then using the same brush, I'm going to take that lighter color. So do you remember that lighter? In my case, it's actually dried up too much, so I'm gonna need to make it again. And that's okay, not a problem. We know how to make it, we can make it. Oops. So I'm gonna start with red again. I'll put a smidge of red. Then I'm gonna take some yellow, mix it up, and then I'll add some white. And here we go, I have my light color again. I'll add a touch more white. Oh yeah, I think that's the one, but we'll know once we try it, right? So, we'll add a couple of brush strokes pretty much over the same areas, but with this lighter color now. You do see, you should be able to see them because they're going to be a little bit lighter than what you have. And you can even use your small brush. I'm using medium small, but if you find that medium small is still too chunky and you want to have more of a textured finer lines, you can use just small brush for this. Because sometimes I use my medium small, the full width like this, and sometimes I use the top, so it gives me finer lines that actually this brush does the best. So I just like this brush because it can do both, but if your brush cannot do both, you may want to use two brushes. You may want to use a medium small and a small brush for some brush strokes. So do you see I'm adding some smaller ones too? All of them are vertical, by the way. It just makes it so nice. It's a variety of colors. Now I'll add a brush stroke here as well. So basically the colors that are on our flower will be introduced into our background. And another little thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to splatter just a touch on this section. So I'm going to wash up this brush, put it aside, and I'm going to go back to my medium large brush. And with somewhat a mixture of the two colors, it doesn't have to be one or the other, it doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll even add a bit more white to it. Something similar to that. I'm just going to water it down and fill my brush with it. And then I'm going to do this. Just to add a little bit of it right here. And you may not see it very well, but it is there. Let's add adds a bit of texture. And that's it. I'm happy with this. I'm going to stop. Wash off my brush. I'll put it aside. And now I'm going to go back to a flower. And what we're going to do now is we're going to only use small brush. And we're going to make even lighter color, and we're going to start flicking lighter color from the tips of our flower. And we're going to make darker color, and we're going to flick the darker color from the bottom. So I'm going to start with a lighter one. Again, I'm going to make that orangey color. So if you still have it, you can use it. Just add a bit more white to it. I'm going to start with the red. I'll put some red here. And I'm going to add some yellow. Then I'm going to add some white. Mix it up. And you see this time I'm making it a little lighter than the previous time. Still the same shade, just more white. So let's test it out. And I'm going to water it down, which is very important. And the reason why is two reasons actually. Reason number one, by the time we got to this point in the tutorial, our paint has been out for quite some time already. So it may be a little too dried. Reason number two, some paint generally comes a little on the thicker side. And when we use fine brush like this, if you use thick paint, no matter how good your brush is, even if your brush just costs $100 with that one brush, if your paint is too thick, it's not going to give you a good fine line. So you're not going to be able to get the best out of your brush if you're using too thick of a paint. So to get your brush's potential, you need to water down your paint. And with this, I'm going to start with a background. So why not, right? Oh yeah, that's a good color. I could go lighter, but this is pretty good too. So from the tip, I'm going to start flicking down brush strokes. You see? To lighten it up. And then I'm going to do this on all my flower petals. It's always important that you flick from the top from the tip into the flower. Don't do it the other way around. And for this edge, remember there was edge that's more like turned. This one we're going to separate a bit more with this. And move on to this one. Again, I usually start around the edge, adding more of an outline in a way. And then I flick from there. Beautiful. And then I'm going to move to this bottom one, and I'll do pretty much the same thing. And again, I would say don't use too much paint here. Use what you need, but don't take way too much. So it's just a little hard to work with if your paint is overfilled with, your brush when your brush is overfilled with paint. Sometimes it makes it a little difficult to work with. Alright, doesn't this look great? And again, while we're at it, why not to add it on the background, right? Only if you want to, you don't have to. But I kind of like adding all my colors to the background. Oh, just a few. Yeah, that's good. Don't need any more. I'm happy. And now I'm going to move to my darker color. So now, again, I'm going to mix that red. So I'm going to take some red, put it on the side, straight red, add some yellow, not a lot, just a little bit, and no any other color. So just red and yellow. And with this color, we're going to flick from the bottom up. Maybe I'll add more yellow actually. Doesn't look like enough yellow. And I'm going to do that on all of our petals. Yeah, we pretty much have done the same thing already, but now we're adding the texture. And red is such a color that it requires more than one layer usually to keep it super bright and beautiful. So yeah, first layer was great, but now it is actually getting more saturated, it's getting brighter, it's getting better, it's getting textury. Even though we almost use the exact same colors. And then for our next color, To the same color I just used, so yellow mixed with red, I'm going to add a smidge of black to make it a little bit darker. I'm not aiming for it to be super dark. I just want it a little bit darker. Do you see? It still is recognizably red. It doesn't look black, but it has that darkness to it. It's like a red wine at this point. And with the same color, I'm going to do the same thing that we just done with red, but way less. So again, let's start somewhere. Let's start here. So from the bottom, I'm going to flick it up. And you see, it adds a bit of that darkening, a little bit of that depth. Just less than what you did in red, so it doesn't cover all your red up and doesn't make your color muddy, so your color still stays really dark, but it's just shaping everything. And guys, again, don't forget to take breaks when you need them. This is a video recording. None of this has to be done on wet necessarily, by the way. All this can very well be done on dry, so there is no need to do this in one sitting or in one chunk. If you feel like you're tired, it's been a while, maybe you pause this video for quite a couple times, and you feel like, uh-oh, I need a break. Take a break. It's always safer to take a break when you need it versus paying through being tired and then regret it. So do you see it's starting getting shape? So here too, I'll flick it over red. And here too, but less than red. Right. And then the very bottom one, so the same story pretty much. I'm going to go from the inside out. I'm just going to flick it in a couple areas. And remember there was underneath layer there. So now we can go on this underneath layer and we'll literally color it in with this color. It's not going to be visible everywhere. There are just a couple spots where it is going to be visible. See? A bit more here and just like a smidge, tiny, tiny little smidge here and there. Here I'll add a little flick from the outside in. And then the darkest color, I'm going to add even more black to it, and I'm going to use just a touch of that. So again, I'm going to water it down a little, because as I continue painting, it's continue drying, right? And then I'm going to add a smidge of black, actually more. So do you see it gets darker, but it's not a solid black. It still is a mixture. So if I show you, inside it almost looks like brown. So that's what I'm going to use now. Again, just a touch of this on my brush, not a lot. And I'm going to add just a couple flicks with this. So starting from the bottom, up, just a little. You see how little I'm adding? Very, very little. Great. And a little bit right here. We're more like indicating the darkest points at this point. From the inside out again. Smidge here. 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 Just like a touch. Of course, onto the middle one, and I'll bring it a little bit up the edges here of these two flowers. Just separate them a little bit more. Touch here. Here, of course, too. Here. 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 Awesome. And so to finish up this flower, we can do either just one color, simpler version, it's just one color, and that's just white. More complicated version is you're going to do another orange. And guys, this is not necessary. I just want to say this right away. If you're happy with it, no need for another color. There's plenty of colors here. But we also can, if you want to. So, do you remember that color that I used originally as my lightest one? When we moved to our small brush, right? I still have a little bit of that. So to the same color, I'm going to add more white and more yellow to make it even more orangey, almost yellowy, and lighter. And with this color, this is what it looks like. You can almost consider it like a warm skin tone color. It's like a lighter orangey color. Again, super optional. We can add a couple more brush strokes. So do you see I'm not adding a full-on outline now? I'm just lightly using just a touch of paint on your brush. You either dab along the edge or flick down along the edge. Sometimes I would dab, sometimes I would flick. You see, just a tiny touch. And some of the flicks can go longer. It's okay for them to go longer. Not all of them have to be tiny. It's good to have a variety of some that are kind of breaking your flower, going in. The most important thing I would say about this is how little paint you need to use. Just a tiny touch. And what I usually do to ensure that is I use only paint on the tip of my brush. So when I refill my brush, I don't refill the entire thing. I refill maybe halfway through. I make sure the tip of my brush has the paint. And then I wash my brush quite often as well, because this paint, when you use just a little bit of paint and on a small brush, sometimes it dries on your actual brush and it clogs your brush. So then your brush becomes quite bulky and just chunky, and you don't understand why you're doing everything right, but your lines are just not turning the way they should. That just means you probably have paint that dried on your brush and is clogging it. So when you work with a small details, it's super, super important to wash your brush quite often, fully, and then refill it fully to make sure you don't get that clogged thing. And again, guys, if you need to pause this, please do. I'm going to continue reminding you to do this. Because it is important. All right. And now I'm going to take straight black, just a little bit of it on my brush. I'll water it down as well. I water down everything that I use on my small brush. And I'm going to add a couple of dots right here first. Then from some of those dots, I'm going to add a flicks down. Awesome. And now I'm going to move to white. So again, I'm going to wash off my brush. I will take some white and I'll water it down. If you need to change your water for this, go for it. I find that my water is still quite alright, but your water may be dirtier if you're using less water. So water down your white. Your white needs to be nice and liquid. And again, I'm going to wash off my brush, dab it off on a paper towel, and I'm just going to take just a bit of white. I don't want my whole brush, bulky with it. I just want to touch, and I'm going to add a final highlight to this. And I'm going to start right on the edges again. I'm going to use a technique, sometimes linear, sometimes I'm going to dab, sometimes I'm going to rub, and I'm going to do a lot of flicks. So from the edge down, very lightly again. The same thing, it's important that you use very little bit of paint on your brush. And your paint should be watered down so it's nice and transparent as well. Yes, liquid for you to be able to use it on your brush, but also transparent. So we're watering down for two reasons. A, to be liquid, B, to be transparent. And then I'm going to add this highlights wherever I please to. So it doesn't have to be consistently. You see, it's not even, right? Certain areas can have more, certain areas can have less. And that's the beauty of it, because this flower, they're not straight, right? There's like waves there. Certain areas that are more curved, certain areas less curved, and they're reflecting light differently. And that's why there's certain areas that will have more, certain areas that will have less, and that's great. And also, notice how sometimes, if my brush strokes are too harsh, I would literally just smudge them with my finger a little bit. To make them less harsh. Beautiful. Awesome. And the last thing that I want to add white on my flower is I'm going to take actually more saturated white now. And I'm going to add just a couple little dots over those black ones. Alright, and now we can move to our stem. So for our stem, I'm going to start by mixing dark green. So I'm going to scoop some blue on the side. And I'm going to add about equal part of yellow. You see it turns into a very dark green, which is awesome. That's exactly what I'm going to start with. And with this dark green, I'm going to go, so I can hardly see my stem here, but I see somewhat of an outline. If you don't see it, just wing it. It's not a problem. I'm going to start right here. It's going to be a little bit wider where it starts. And then I'm going to flip it further down. And somewhere around here, I'm going to take some of this paint on the side, take some white, mix it in, make much lighter green, and I'm going to continue this with much lighter green all the way to the bottom. And then I'll create a transition between the two. I'm just trying to flick in some of my lighter one into my darker one. And then I'm going to take my lighter green, which by the way I need more, I didn't make enough. Let's take a bit more, make it great. So here's my lighter green. I'm going to take this green and I'm going to color in this entire thing. Again, if you still have it, if you still somewhat can see it, great. If not, you can even take your pencil if your background is dry and try by sketching it again. Or just wing it. It's a pretty simple shape. So you start with like an upside down teardrop on a slightly on an angle, not straight, just a little bit like that. And then you flick from there down the stem. So it's not hard. You could totally do this without a sketch. And after you have that, you're going to take your darker green right away while it's still wet. And the darker green, we're going to add a couple brush strokes right here. So on this lower half, just flicking it from the top down, not from the very top, from the top of this part. I'm just going to fill it with a couple brush strokes. We're going to add a couple brush strokes on the stem too. So just a little. And then I'm going to take white, so straight white, just a little bit of it. And again, while it's still wet, I'm going to flick it into this upper part so it blends in a little. Do you see how it's still, you can see green, but it's lighter. And that's what we wanted there. Now after that, I can make even darker green. So I'm going to take a smidge of my black. You don't need much of it. You're literally going to need a little brush stroke. Add it into this green, and you see it turn into like a mixture of green and black. So it's like a dimmer, darker green. And with this, I'm going to add a couple brush strokes right here on the very top to darken it up just a little bit. And I'll add a few flicks right here too. And then I'll finish it up with white. So again, I'm going to wash off my small brush. I'll take some white, water down, super important. For, again, mostly for consistency, not for the color. At this point, we don't need it transparent, we just need it nice and liquid. And with this color, I'm going to add a couple flicks on the edge of it. So, like a little, see like little dabs on the edge to make it look like there's some fuzz. You know, some stems can be a little fuzzy, have those little tiny hair, I guess. So we're adding those, and when the light comes from the behind, it hits them so you can see them. So we're going to do a little bit of that on both sides. On this one and a bit on this one. So I'm going to add a smidge of almost outline here. And then a bit of that dabs along the stem. Just a little. Just a little. And guys, after this, we are done our painting, or at least the front part of it. Isn't it beautiful? So now, let's talk about our edges. So now let's do our edges. For those of you who like color matching, what you could do, I wouldn't be doing it, but you can, is you just take either color match or teals, or just take one of them, whichever. I would say the darkest one is probably a safer option. Color all your edges with that, and then if you want to, you can take some reds and still flick them a little bit, and it's going to look like you wrapped your image around your canvas. Now, if you prefer a bit more contrast look, so to make it look more like it's framed painting, you can take contrast colors, such as red. Yes, it is compatible, but it also contrasts because a lot of the background is teal, and just color your edges with red. Or what I would personally prefer to do, and that's what I generally love doing, is coloring my edges with black, because black is universally contrast color to everything, and it's just universally good for edges. So when you hang this painting, if you look from the edge, it's going to look like you framed it with that black frame. It almost looks like a fine frame around your painting. So again, but that only works for people who love contrast look. If you don't like contrast look, either use red or use teal or color match, and you will likely enjoy that look way more. But do something about it. Don't leave the edge like this, because that's not nice. That's not a good edge, not a good look when you hang it. It looks a little too messy. And of course we need to sign it. So I'm going to take a little bit of black I will water it down and I'll put my signature anywhere I would like. Maybe I'll put it here. You can put your name, your signature, your initials, anything you want. And guys, after you're done, if you would like to share your painting with us, please do. We love seeing how paintings turned out. In the description of this video, there is a link to our Facebook group. It's a painting support group. You're welcome to share your painting there, so just go into the description of this video and you will see it there. We would love to see how it turned out. And if you guys had lots of fun painting with me and you want to say thank you by tipping me, I would never say no to that. You can also use a link in the description of this video. My name is Vera and there's a PayPal link on where you can tip me. You don't have to, it's not an obligation, but it is a really nice way to say thank you. If you enjoyed this tutorial, of course. So, and that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, or you just want to share your experience with us, you're welcome to comment to this video, or you're welcome to message us on Facebook. If you prefer more of a immediate response, because we don't respond to comments very often, but we do respond to all the messages and emails. So if you do have questions, please feel free to message us on Facebook. We would love to answer your questions for you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We have lots of wonderful tutorials here and even more coming up. So thank you for joining me, guys. And let's do this again sometimes. Bye, everyone.